Hamas was running for his life. The donkey route had already stolen the lives of hundreds before him, and now, as he sprinted through the barren land, he wondered if he would be next. The journey to Canada had been nothing short of a nightmare. Cramped trucks, endless hunger, merciless deserts, and the constant fear of death. He had seen men collapse from exhaustion, their bodies left behind like discarded trash. He had survived, barely. Now, with military gunfire echoing behind him, survival had become a game of seconds. He had made one mistake. He had stopped. While others were focused on escaping, Seamus had noticed something on the side of the dirt road, a wounded African gray parrot. Its gray feathers were dull and blood-stained, its tiny body trembling with exhaustion. It should have been the last thing on his mind, but something in its eyes had made him pause. That hesitation had cost him. The moment he bent down to pick up the bird, bullets rained down behind him. His group, men who had traveled this hell with him, were being captured or killed. He should have died with them. But he didn't. The moment he grabbed the parrot, he felt an unseen force pulling him to the side. An instinct, a gut feeling, a warning. He leapt into the nearest thicket and stayed low as the military rounded up the others. If he had been just a second slower, he would have been lying in the dirt with a bullet in his skull. Instead, he clutched the shivering bird to his chest, his heart pounding. For the next few days, he traveled alone, hiding, starving, his body screaming for rest. But he never let go of the parrot. Something about this tiny, wounded creature made him feel like he wasn't alone. It had saved him. Maybe not in a way that made sense, but Seamus believed in signs, in fate, in luck. And this bird? It was good luck. By the time he crossed the final border and stepped onto Canadian soil, he had named the parrot Alex. He didn't know why, but the name felt right. It felt powerful. Seamus had no money, no papers, and no idea what to do next. But as he walked through the unfamiliar streets of a country that did not welcome him, Alex sat perched on his shoulder, silent, watchful, almost as if he knew something Seamus didn't. It wasn't just a bird, it was the beginning of something bigger. Seamus had finally made it. After months of hardship, endless struggles, and near-death experiences, he had arrived in Canada, the land of his dreams. But he wasn't alone. Sitting on his shoulder, as if it belonged there, was Alex, the African gray parrot that had saved his life. Seamus wasn't sure why he had kept the bird with him. Maybe it was guilt for almost leaving it behind. Or maybe it was because deep down he believed in signs, fate, and luck. And Alex? He was good luck. The first few weeks in Canada were brutal. The streets were cold, the people distant, and the fear of getting caught never left his mind. He had no identity, no papers, no job. He was invisible, yet constantly afraid that someone would see him. At night, while sitting in his rented, windowless basement, he would talk to Alex. At first, it was just to kill the loneliness, but soon he realized something. Alex understood him. African gray parrots weren't just smart. They were freakishly intelligent. Alex could mimic voices, understand emotions, and even hold conversations. It was eerie, almost unnatural how he seemed to grasp the depth of human thoughts. One night, as Seamus lay on the mattress staring at the ceiling, he spoke without thinking. "What now, Alex? What do I do?" For a moment, there was silence. Then, in a voice eerily calm, Alex replied, "Marry a local. Get citizenship." Seamus sat up straight, his heart pounding. The words hung in the air like an undeniable truth. It made perfect sense. A marriage could fix everything, give him papers, security, a future. But the thought of it made him laugh bitterly. Who would marry him? He was a Negro, an illegal immigrant, a nobody. No white woman would even look at him. But the idea refused to leave his mind. For days, Seamus tried to push it away, but Alex wouldn't let him. Every morning, every evening, the parrot would repeat the same words. Find a girl, marry her, stay. It was annoying, irritating, infuriating. But it was also the truth. One day, while working at a local warehouse, he met Nisa, a young, white Canadian woman who seemed different from the rest. She was kind. She laughed at his jokes, and most importantly, She didn't look at him like he was less than human. For the first time, Seamus saw hope. Maybe Alex was right. Maybe this parrot had just given him the key to his new life. Seamus never imagined he would fall in love in Canada. He had come here to survive, not to dream. But dreams had a way of creeping in when you least expected them. Nisa was the last person he thought would ever look at him. She was white, educated, and had everything he never did. Security, a passport, a life free from fear. Yet fate had other plans. They met at the warehouse where Seamus worked long hours just to make ends meet. Nisa wasn't like the others. She didn't look at him with suspicion or pity. She laughed at his jokes, listened to his stories, and made him feel like he wasn't invisible. Seamus felt something dangerous. Hope. But hope was a cruel thing. He knew better than to believe in it. One evening, as he sat in his tiny room, Alex, the parrot who had saved his life, watched him closely. "She likes you," Alex said, mimicking Nisa's voice with eerie accuracy. Seamus almost dropped his cup of tea. Alex had been observing. He had seen the way Nisa smiled at him, the way she lingered after conversations, the way her eyes softened when she looked at him. Could it be true? Could someone like her truly care about someone like him? But even if she did, there was one thing Seamus knew for sure. Nisa would never marry him. He was an illegal immigrant, a man with no future. And yet, when he told Alex this, the parrot simply tilted his head and said one word: try. So he did. Seamus gathered all his courage and spoke to Nisa. He told her about his situation, his fears, his desperation. He didn't beg, he didn't lie. He simply told her the truth. And to his shock, she said yes. Seamus could hardly believe it. Why would she agree? He expected conditions, rules, maybe even a hidden agenda. But Nisa simply smiled and said, "Because you're a good man." It was the first time anyone had ever called him that. Alex's warning. Everything felt like a dream. Seamus had a wife, a home, a future. He had defied the odds, but Alex wasn't convinced. When Seamus brought Nisa home to meet him, the parrot's reaction was immediate. The moment she left, Alex ruffled his feathers and spoke in a tone that sent chills down Seamus's spine. "Red flag." Seamus frowned. "What?" "She's lying." Seamus laughed. "Alex, she just agreed to help me. Why would she lie?" "Lies, secrets, bad." Seamus shook his head, irritated. It was just a bird. What did it know about love, about relationships? "She is good for me, Alex." "No," Alex insisted. "Bad. Big mistake." The argument escalated. For the first time, Seamus felt anger toward his only friend. "You don't get to control my life, Alex." "Your mistake," the parrot whispered. Seamus ignored him, and with that, he chose Nisa over Alex. But what he didn't realize was that Alex had never been wrong before. Seamus had never felt this happy in his life. He had a wife, a home, and most importantly, Canadian nationality. His days of living in fear were over. No more running, no more hiding. He could finally breathe. Nisa was everything he had ever wanted. Beautiful, confident, and completely in love with him. At least that's what he believed. They traveled together, laughed together, and built a life that felt too perfect to be real. But perfection is often an illusion. At first, the signs were small. Nisa was controlling. She wanted things her way, where they lived, who he spoke to, what he did with his time. If Seamus ever disagreed, she would guilt-trip him, making him feel like he owed her everything. And maybe he did. But Alex saw it all. The parrot never stopped warning him. Every time Nisa left the room, Alex would whisper, "She's not who you think she is." Seamus refused to listen. He started ignoring Alex, pushing him away, shutting him out. At first, it was small things, leaving Alex alone in his cage for hours, not talking to him as much. Then it became more. He stopped seeking Alex's advice. He stopped trusting him. Nisa, of course, encouraged this. She hated Alex. "It's just a bird, Seamus. Why do you let it control you?" she would say, rolling her eyes every time Alex spoke. Seamus wanted to argue that Alex had saved his life once, that Alex had always been right before. But the deeper he fell into his perfect marriage, The more he convinced himself that Alex was wrong this time. Maybe he was being paranoid. Maybe he was just used to struggling so much that happiness felt unnatural. So he ignored Alex. But Alex didn't stop watching, because deep down the parrot knew something was coming. Something that would shatter Seamus's illusion of happiness forever. Seamus was tired of Alex, the once beloved parrot that had been his lifeline, his companion, and his guardian, now felt like an unnecessary burden. He had built a new life with Nisa, and Alex had no place in it anymore. The bird never stopped whispering warnings, constantly repeating the same words. She's lying. She's using you. She will destroy you. It was driving him insane. One evening, after a long day at work, Seamus sat at the dinner table with Nisa and finally said what had been on his mind for weeks. "I'm selling Alex." Nisa's face lit up instantly. "That's a great idea, babe. He's just a bird. We can get a dog instead." Her excitement made Seamus pause. Something about how quickly she agreed unsettled him, but he brushed the feeling away. Maybe she was right. Maybe it was time to let go of the past. That night, as he prepared to move Alex's cage outside, the parrot spoke in a tone he had never used before. Low, urgent, and serious. "One chance, Seamus." Seamus frowned. "What?" Alex tilted his head, his dark eyes sharper than ever. "Give me one chance to prove she's lying." Seamus sighed. "Alex, stop." "One chance," Alex repeated. "Let me show you the truth." Seamus hesitated. Maybe it was old loyalty. Maybe it was the fact that Alex had never been wrong before. Or maybe deep down, he was already doubting Nisa. Against his better judgment, he agreed. "Fine," he muttered. "What's the plan?" The next morning, instead of going to work, Seamus pretended to leave. But in reality, he and Alex waited just a few blocks away, watching. He had no idea what he was expecting, but when Nisa stepped out of the apartment, his stomach twisted. She had told him she had a work meeting. Instead of heading to her office, she walked toward a different building down the street. Seamus followed, keeping his distance, his heart pounding harder with each step. She stopped at apartment number 6. He watched as she took out a key and entered, like she had done it 100 times before. She wasn't supposed to have another place. She wasn't supposed to be anywhere but at work. Every warning Alex had given him came rushing back. His mind screamed for him to turn around, to pretend he hadn't seen anything. But Alex tilted his head. "Go in," he whispered. Swallowing the lump in his throat, Seamus pushed open the door. What he saw shattered every illusion he had been living in. Nisa was there, in another man's arms. The man was white, well-dressed, and completely different from Seamus. They weren't just talking. They were intimate, familiar. As if this wasn't new at all. She had never loved him. She had been using him all along. Nisa froze when she saw him standing there, her face draining of color. "Seamus, I can explain." He didn't want to hear it, his fists clenched, his entire body shaking with rage and betrayal. The man beside her looked confused, clearly unaware of who Seamus was. "Who is this?" Before Nisa could answer, Alex's voice cut through the tension like a knife. "She used him, for papers, for money, for everything." The other man's expression changed instantly. He stepped away from Nisa as if she were a stranger, as if he too had been caught in her web of lies. Seamus could barely breathe. He had been nothing but a tool for her, a ticket to citizenship, stability, and financial security. She had played him like a fool, and he had willingly walked into the trap. Alex had been right all along. The argument that followed was ugly. Nisa begged, cried, lied, trying to manipulate him just as she had done before. But Seamus wasn't blind anymore. He turned his back on her, walking out of the apartment without another word. His hands were shaking, his heart was broken. But for the first time in months, he felt free. With Alex still perched on his shoulder, he stepped into the cold Canadian air, taking a deep breath. The weight that had been crushing him for so long had finally lifted. This time he would listen to Alex, and this time he would not make the same mistake again. Seamus couldn't believe how blind he had been. Every warning Alex had given him had been right. Every doubt he had ignored had been real. Nisa had played him from the start. He had been nothing more than a means to an end, a way for her to get what she wanted. The betrayal cut deep, but there was no time to dwell on it. He had to get out, had to leave before she could twist the situation in her favor. As he walked away from the apartment, Alex perched on his shoulder, silent for once. Seamus felt empty, his mind racing with everything that had happened. He had sacrificed everything for Nisa, ignored the one friend who had truly cared for him, and in return, he had been deceived. But now things were different. He wasn't the same desperate man who had arrived in Canada with nothing. He had his nationality, he had a future, and he had Alex. For days, Seamus avoided Nisa's calls. He knew she wouldn't give up easily. People like her never did. They always found a way to manipulate their way back in. And just as he expected one evening, she showed up at his apartment, her eyes red from crying. "Seamus, please, let's talk," she begged. "You misunderstood what you saw." He almost laughed. Misunderstood? He had seen everything with his own eyes. But instead of arguing, he let her talk. He wanted to hear what lies she would spin now. Nisa weaved a story about how the man was just a friend, how she had made a mistake, how she loved him and wanted to make things right. But as she spoke, Alex sat in his cage watching her closely. Then out of nowhere, Alex mimicked her voice perfectly. "Seamus is so stupid. He actually thinks I love him." Nisa's face turned pale. Seamus froze. His blood ran cold. Alex had repeated something she had said before, but not now, not in this moment. That meant she had said it sometime before, somewhere in the past, when she had thought no one was listening. Her expression quickly turned from guilt to anger. "That stupid bird is lying," she snapped. But Seamus wasn't listening to her anymore. He was listening to every instinct, every warning, every gut feeling he had ignored. Alex had been right about everything. Nisa's mask had finally slipped. She tried one last time, reaching for his hand. "Please, Seamus, don't throw this away." He stepped back. "You already did." Nisa's true nature came out then. The tears dried up. The desperation vanished. "Fine," she spat. "You think you're something special? You were nothing when I met you, just an illegal immigrant looking for a way in. I made you. I gave you a life." Seamus smiled, a sad, knowing smile. "And now I'm taking it back." With that, he turned away from her for the last time. She cursed, shouted, but he didn't look back. The moment the door closed behind him, he let out a breath he hadn't realized he had been holding. It was over. She was out of his life. He had lost a lot, but he had gained himself back. Alex fluttered to his shoulder. "Smart boy," Seamus chuckled, shaking his head. "You always were smarter than me." For the first time in a long time, he felt free. No lies, no manipulation, no chains. Just him, Alex, and a future that finally belonged to him. Seamus sat in his small apartment, staring at the city lights beyond the window. He was free. The weight of deception, the suffocating grip of Nisa's lies, had finally lifted. But in its place was a strange emptiness. He had come to Canada with nothing, hoping for a better life. He had fought to survive, made impossible choices, and in the end, he had nearly lost himself in the illusion of love. But now he saw clearly. He was no longer a desperate man clinging to a dream. He had built a life, even if it wasn't the one he had imagined. Alex flapped his wings and settled onto his shoulder, his sharp eyes watching Seamus. "No more sadness," the parrot said, his voice eerily human. Seamus smiled. "I'm not sad, Alex." And for the first time in months, that was true. He wasn't broken. He wasn't lost. He was simply starting over. The next few days were quiet, peaceful in a way Seamus had almost forgotten was possible. He went to work, came home, and spent his evenings watching the world outside. No more games, no more manipulation, no more pretending. He found comfort in the simplest things: the taste of hot tea, the cool breeze from his open window, the presence of Alex always near. But life, as always, had surprises waiting. One evening, while walking home, he noticed a small crowd gathered near the park. Curious, he stepped closer. A street performer stood in the center, playing a violin, her music weaving through the air like magic. She wasn't flashy or loud, but there was something in the way she played, something raw, something real. Seamus stood there, listening, completely mesmerized. Alex tilted his head. "You like her?" Seamus scoffed. "I don't even know her." But Alex only ruffled his feathers. "Not yet." The performance ended, and the woman packed up her violin. Seamus hesitated before stepping forward. "You play beautifully." She looked up surprised and smiled. A real, warm, uncalculated smile. "Thank you. Not many people stop to listen." Seamus glanced around at the fading crowd. "Their loss." She laughed, and just like that, something shifted. It wasn't love at first sight, not a grand romantic moment. It was something better, something genuine. They talked for a while, just two strangers sharing a moment in the cool evening air. No expectations, no lies, just honesty. Her name was Mira, and she had come to Canada chasing dreams of her own. She wasn't perfect. She wasn't part of some grand plan. She was real. As they parted ways, she glanced at Alex, perched on Seamus's shoulder. "Your parrot's really smart." Alex bobbed his head. "Smarter than him?" She laughed. "I believe it." Seamus grinned, shaking his head. "Yeah, me too." As he walked away, he felt something new. Possibility. Not the desperate, grasping kind of hope he had once clung to, but something steady, something sure. He was moving forward. And this time he knew one thing for certain: he wouldn't ignore Alex again.